The millionaire only needed a fake girlfriend, but he found something overwhelming in his employee. He needed an escort. She needed the money to survive. It was just one weekend, a contract, but all it took was one unrehearsed touch, one kiss outside the agreement, and the lie became desire. She entered that world of luxury not knowing what to expect. And he, accustomed to commanding and not feeling, ended up surrendering to a woman who was supposed to be temporary, but became etched onto his skin, into his gaze, into his heart, because what happened between them was never part of the deal. Sorry to interrupt your story, but if you like this type of content, don't forget to subscribe. Bless this channel by helping us grow, and may God multiply it back to you twofold. Thank you, and enjoy the video. From the 28th floor of the Blackwood Tower, Damian Blackwood surveyed New York City with the same cold detachment he reserved for his financial statements. The penthouse of glass and steel perfectly mirrored his personality, orderly, minimalist, and completely under control. At 35, Damian had built a real estate empire that positioned him among the most influential men in the United States, but his personal life was an emotional wasteland, as empty as it was impeccable. The chime of his phone cut through his thoughts. Seeing the name on the screen, Damian suppressed a sigh. Eleanor Blackwood, his grandmother, never called for trivial conversation. "Grandmother," he answered, his tone as neutral as the one he used for the most tense negotiations. "Damian, my dear." Eleanor's voice was sweet, but he knew the steel that lay beneath the honeyed tone. "This weekend, we're celebrating your aunt and uncle's wedding anniversary at the estate. The entire family will be there, and this time I won't accept any excuses. You know I'm closing the Hudson Yards project, Grandmother. It's impossible for me to—" "Impossible is a word the Blackwoods don't recognize," she interrupted curtly. "But I didn't call to argue. I called to inform you that I've already reserved your room, the master suite, the one for married couples." The silence that followed was so thick, Damian could hear his own pulse quicken. "I've told you 1,000 times, Damian. It's time for you to settle down. Your grandfather, may he rest in peace, stipulated in his trust that only the grandchildren who have started a family will inherit the majority shares of the Blackwood Group. Your cousins have already fulfilled their duty. You're the only one left. Grandmother, I'm not getting married because of a trust. I'm not asking for an immediate wedding. I just want to meet this girlfriend you've been talking about for 6 months, the mysterious woman who is never available for family gatherings." Damian pinched the bridge of his nose. The fictitious girlfriend had been a desperate lie to appease family pressure, and now that small lie threatened to snowball into a monumental disaster. "You will bring her this weekend," Eleanor decreed, "or I will assume she doesn't exist, and you know what that means for your position in the company." The call ended abruptly, leaving Damian with a problem that not even his fortune could solve. He needed a girlfriend in less than 24 hours. He mentally reviewed his options: models, socialites, executives from his circle. All would require explanations, non-disclosure agreements, and worst of all, they would create impossible expectations. Damian hated losing control of any situation. The delicate sound of porcelain being placed on the glass of his desk pulled him from his thoughts. There she was, Maya Reed, the young woman he had hired just 3 weeks ago as his housekeeper. "Your coffee, Mr. Blackwood," she said, with that soft yet firm voice that characterized her. For the first time, something about Maya's presence caught Damian's full attention. She wasn't conventionally beautiful by the elite standards of his social circle, but there was something magnetic about her. She looked to be around 27, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, large amber eyes, and a dignity in her posture that contradicted her simple uniform. In an instant, a wild idea crossed his mind. "Maya," he said, surprising her by using her first name, something he had never done before. "Do you have plans for this weekend?" The question caught her so off guard, she nearly spilled the water she was pouring. "Excuse me, sir? I'll double your salary for this month," he continued, speaking as if he were closing a business deal. "I need you to accompany me to a family gathering. It would be in the capacity of my partner." Maya stared at him as if he had just proposed a trip to Mars. "You're asking me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "Precisely. It would be for a weekend at the family estate in the Hamptons. All you have to do is follow my instructions and behave as if we're in a serious relationship." "Mr. Blackwood, I can't—" "Triple your salary," he interrupted, rising from his chair, closing the distance between them. "And a bonus if you're convincing." Maya instinctively took a step back. Her mind was racing, calculating what that money would mean. She could pay for 2 months of her mother's medical treatments, settle the debt from her younger sister's community college. "I don't have the right clothes for something like that," she objected weakly. "That can be fixed," he replied, already dialing on his phone. "Teresa," he spoke to his executive assistant, "I need a personal stylist at my apartment in an hour. And contact Fuentes at the Arlington boutique. Have her bring a complete selection for a young woman who's a size 6. Maya nodded, still in a daze. "We leave tomorrow at 7 a.m., Damien continued, taking the deal as done. "Prepare for an intense weekend, Maya. My family is not conventional." When Damien left to take an urgent call, Maya sank into one of the elegant leather armchairs. What was she getting herself into? Pretending to be the girlfriend of one of New York's most eligible bachelors, in front of a family that would surely scrutinize her like a specimen under a microscope. But the money, that money would change her family's life. That night, while Damien obsessively reviewed the details of the plan in his master bedroom, Maya lay in the small staff quarters, both unable to sleep, aware that they had set something in motion that was completely beyond their control. Tomorrow, they would step onto a stage for which neither had rehearsed, playing the most difficult role of all, two people in love who had never known true love. What neither of them knew was that sometimes life writes scripts more surprising than any planned fiction. Damien's Range Rover moved along the Long Island Expressway with the precision of a Swiss watch. During the entire drive, they barely exchanged words, each lost in their own concerns. Maya watched the changing landscape through the window. The city's skyscrapers gave way to suburban sprawl, and finally, to the lush greenery that announced their arrival in the Hamptons. "We need to go over the rules," Damien said, breaking the silence with 20 minutes left to their destination. "The story is simple. We met 6 months ago at an art exhibition in Soho. You're a conservator of historical artifacts, a respectable profession, but not intimidating to my family." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Why not tell the truth about my job? Are you ashamed that your fake girlfriend is a housekeeper?" "It's not shame, it's strategy," he replied, without taking his eyes off the road. "My grandmother would never believe I fell for someone who works for me. She'd think it was opportunism." "And isn't it?" she asked with a trace of bitterness. Damien glanced at her briefly, for the first time sensing the wounded dignity behind her question. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get the money and I get some peace." The rest of the instructions were precise. No excessive displays of affection, no real personal information, and above all, never be alone with any family member without him present. When the vehicle finally passed through the imposing gates of Grey Gables, Maya couldn't help but gasp in awe. The place looked like something out of a classic American film, a perfectly preserved colonial-style mansion, with white clapboard walls and dark shutters, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens and ancient trees that shaded the stone patios. In the distance, the manicured lawns stretched towards the Atlantic. "Remember," Damien murmured as he parked, "these people have grown up spotting lies. Don't improvise." They had barely stepped out of the car when the massive front door swung open. A small but imposing woman, dressed in sober elegance with perfectly coiffed silver hair, moved toward them with open arms. "Finally, my phantom grandson deigns to appear," Eleanor Blackwood exclaimed, hugging Damien with a surprising strength for someone her age. Then she fixed her piercing eyes on Maya, scrutinizing her from head to toe. "And you must be the famous girlfriend, the one we were beginning to think was a hologram." "Maya Reed, ma'am." "It's a pleasure to meet you," she replied, extending her hand with a confidence she didn't feel. To Damien's surprise, his grandmother ignored the hand and embraced her too. "We hug in this family, dear. The Blackwoods are warm. Well, all of us except my grandson." The comment drew laughter from the family members who had already started to gather around. Cousins, uncles, nieces. Maya lost count after the 8th name. They all examined her with barely concealed curiosity, assessing if she was worthy of the main heir. Come, let the poor girl breathe," Eleanor intervened. "You'll have all weekend to interrogate her. Now let's go to the dining room. Dinner is served." The dining room was a stunning space with a table set for 24, lit by an antique chandelier and decorated with heirloom china that had belonged to generations of Blackwoods. Maya, seated to Damien's right, felt as though she had entered a living museum where she was the only out-of-place exhibit. "So, Maya," one of the uncles began as the first course was served, "Damien tells us you're a conservator. What pieces have you been working on lately?" Maya felt her heart stop. She hadn't prepared the details of her supposed profession. Just as panic threatened to betray her, she remembered the trips she used to take with her mother to the Met as a child. "I'm currently assisting with the restoration of an early American manuscript," she replied in a clear voice. "It's painstaking work that requires a lot of patience, almost like deciphering a message from the past." The answer seemed to satisfy the uncle, who continued to ask about conservation techniques that, to her surprise, Maya could answer thanks to a documentary she had recently watched. As dinner progressed, Maya began to relax. She started sharing adapted anecdotes from her real life, always careful to change the compromising details. She spoke of her mother, an elementary school teacher, true, her passion for traditional American baking, true, and how she had studied at a state university on a scholarship, false, she never had the chance to finish college. To Damien's astonishment, his family was completely captivated. Maya responded with a perfect blend of respect and character, occasionally making witty remarks that elicited genuine laughter. Even his cousin Renata, the most critical of the clan, seemed to appreciate her lack of pretense. "It must be refreshing for you, Damien," his Aunt Margaret commented, "to find someone so authentic after so many calculating women." Damien, who had remained unusually quiet, simply smiled and took Maya's hand on the table, a gesture they hadn't rehearsed. The touch sent an electric current up her arm. "Sometimes," he replied, looking into her eyes with unnerving intensity, "you find value where you least expect it." For a fleeting moment, the performance felt dangerously real. Maya had to remind herself that it was all an elaborate charade, that the man looking at her as if he truly admired her was the same one who had hired her as if she were just another service for his convenience. When they finally retired to their shared room, to Maya's initial horror, as she hadn't considered this detail, Damien closed the door and exhaled slowly. "Impressive," he said in a low voice. "Even I almost believed you." "Is that a compliment?" she asked, beginning to undo the elaborate braid they had styled for her that morning. "It's an observation," he replied, loosening his tie. "My family adores you, and they've only just met you." "I didn't expect that," Maya shrugged. "Maybe because I showed them a real person, not a character." Damien watched her with curiosity. For the first time, he saw more than an employee or a solution to his problem. He saw a woman with a depth he hadn't anticipated. "Tomorrow will be harder," he warned, breaking the moment. "The interrogation has only just begun." As Damien made a makeshift bed on the room's sofa, Maya looked out the window at the moonlit gardens. She wondered how she would survive this weekend without losing something far more valuable than her time, her heart, which was inexplicably starting to respond to the wrong man for all the wrong reasons. The first rays of sun filtered through the curtains of the room when Maya opened her eyes. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The four-poster bed, the antique mahogany furniture, the scent of jasmine wafting in through the slightly open window, the Blackwood estate, the stage for her grand lie. She turned her head and saw Damien asleep on the uncomfortable sofa. Even in sleep he maintained that serious expression, as if he were solving problems in his subconscious. Maya rose silently, grabbed her clothes, and went to the bathroom. The clock read just 6:30 a.m., but years of waking early for her jobs had programmed her body to rise with the dawn. The estate was enveloped in a pleasant silence as she walked down the stairs. Her steps instinctively led her to the kitchen, a territory that always felt familiar no matter where she was. Pushing the door open, she found an older woman kneading dough with expert movements. "Good morning," Maya greeted. "Can I help with anything?" The woman looked up, surprised. "Don Damien's girlfriend wants to help in the kitchen, now that's a first." "My name is Maya," she smiled, rolling up the sleeves of her blouse. "And I love to bake. What are you making?" "Mrs. Gable, at your service," the cook replied, assessing her with curiosity. "I'm making pancake batter for breakfast. The family sleeps in on Saturdays, but I like to get a head start." Without waiting for an invitation, Maya picked up a knife and began dicing strawberries with professional skill. Mrs. Gable nodded in silent approval. "Where did you learn to handle a knife like that, miss? You look like you've spent time in real kitchens." Maya smiled, remembering the long days helping her mother in the small diner they had to sell when she got sick. "My mom used to say that a woman should know how to speak with her hands, whether with a paintbrush, a scalpel, or a kitchen knife." Soon the kitchen was filled with the aroma of melting butter, sizzling bacon, and freshly ground coffee. Maya moved with a natural grace between the bowls and skillets, sharing culinary tricks and secrets with Mrs. Gable. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she felt completely herself. She was stretching to reach a heavy ceramic bowl on a high shelf when she sensed a presence behind her. A set of fingers brushed against hers as they reached for the same object, sending an electric current up her entire arm. "Allow me," Damien's voice said, so close to her ear she could feel his warm breath on the nape of her neck. Their hands met over the cool ceramic. For a second that stretched too long. Maya froze, suddenly aware of the proximity of their bodies, of the sandalwood scent of his cologne, of how her breathing seemed to have synced with his. Damien lowered the bowl and placed it on the counter with extreme slowness, as if trying to prolong the moment suspended in time. When he finally stepped back, Maya noticed something unusual in his gaze, a vulnerability that contradicted his usual controlled coldness. "I didn't expect to find you here," he murmured, running a hand through his still sleep-tousled hair. "I'm an early riser," she replied, focusing on the task of pouring coffee to hide the blush she felt creeping up her cheeks. "And Mrs. Gable was kind enough to let me help with breakfast." "The young lady has the hands of an angel," the cook interjected. "This is the best pancake batter that's come out of my kitchen in years." Damien took a spoon and tasted it directly from the bowl. His expression of surprise was almost comical. "Incredible," he admitted, looking at Maya with renewed interest. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" She shrugged. "From my mother. In my family, love was always served on a plate." A shadow of melancholy crossed Damien's face. "In mine, love was always served in contracts and business arrangements." The moment of intimacy evaporated as the kitchen door swung open. Evan, Damien's cousin, whom Maya had met the night before, strode in with the breezy confidence typical of someone who has been admired his entire life. "Smells delicious," he exclaimed, making a beeline for Maya. "Good morning, beautiful. You didn't tell me you were a chef in addition to being a conservator." He took her hand and kissed it with exaggerated gallantry. Maya politely withdrew her fingers, noticing out of the corner of her eye how Damien's jaw tightened. "I was just helping a little," she replied simply. "Modest on top of being gorgeous," Evan insisted, leaning against the counter. "Damien, cousin, your good taste surprises me more by the minute. Where have you been hiding this gem all this time?" "I wasn't hiding her," Damien answered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was simply protecting her from some of the more toxic elements in the family." Evan let out a laugh, taking what was clearly a warning as a joke. "Speaking of family elements, did you know we have the traditional tennis match this afternoon? You're invited to cheer from the sidelines, gorgeous, or to play if you dare." "Maya has other plans," Damien interrupted, taking her by the waist in a possessive gesture that surprised her. "I promised I'd show her the vineyards." "What a shame," Evan replied, winking at Maya. "Maybe next time." When his cousin finally left the kitchen, Damien didn't immediately remove his arm from Maya's waist. She could feel the tension in his body, like an alert predator. "I didn't know we were visiting the vineyards," she commented in a low voice. "I just decided," he responded tensely, finally stepping away. Evan has a bad habit of viewing other people's girlfriends as territory to be conquered. "Are you jealous?" Maya asked, unable to suppress a small smile. Damien looked at her as if she had just suggested something absurd. "I'm protecting our cover story. If Evan flirts too much and you respond to it, this whole farce will come crashing down." "I didn't respond to his flirting," she defended herself, suddenly irritated by his insinuation. "No, but you smiled," he retorted, stepping closer again. "And you have a dangerous smile, Maya Reed." Before she could answer, Damien left the kitchen, leaving her with a strange feeling in her chest, half indignation, half something more unsettling that she didn't want to name. Mrs. Gable, who had witnessed the entire scene while feigning concentration on her pans, smiled to herself. "That boy has never looked at anyone like that," she commented casually while whisking eggs. "Like he just found something he didn't even know he was looking for." Maya didn't reply, but the words echoed inside her as she continued to prepare breakfast, wondering at what exact moment this performance had started to feel painfully real. The afternoon sun fell like liquid gold over the Blackwood estate. After a hearty lunch, where Maya had once again charmed the family with her natural ease, Eleanor Blackwood tapped her ebony cane 3 times on the terracotta floor. "It's a family tradition to take a walk through the vineyards on the first day of our gathering," she announced in a tone that allowed for no argument. Real estate gave us our fortune, but wine gives us our class. Everyone present nodded, familiar with the well-known ritual. Damien, for his part, imperceptibly tensed his jaw. He knew these walks all too well. Perfect opportunities for family interrogations with no possible escape. The Blackwoods began to disperse to change their clothes. Before Maya could stand up, Damien leaned towards her. "Don't leave my side," he murmured. "My Aunt Helen is a lawyer who specializes in finding inconsistencies in testimony, and Uncle Richard can get a stone to talk." Maya suppressed a smile. "Are you always this paranoid?" "It's not paranoia when they're actually plotting against you," he replied seriously. Half an hour later, the family procession was moving along a reddish dirt path, flanked by perfectly aligned rows of vines. The Blackwood estate didn't just sit on prime Hampton's real estate. In recent decades, they had diversified into high-end American wines. Damien and Maya walked at the back of the group, following Eleanor, who was explaining the history of each varietal to the younger family members with the pride of a seasoned enophile. "Damien, dear," his grandmother called out suddenly, "explain to your cousin Valentina how our drip irrigation system works. You oversaw the installation 2 years ago." With obvious reluctance, Damien moved to the front, leaving Maya momentarily alone. Not even 30 seconds passed before two aunts materialized at her side like calculated apparitions. "Tell us, Maya," began the one who had introduced herself as Helen, "how does an art conservator end up capturing the most difficult bachelor in New York?" Maya took a deep breath, preparing for the interrogation. However, before she could craft a response, the procession paused to admire a panoramic view, and the group's formation shifted again. To her surprise, she ended up walking alongside Damien on a side path that veered slightly away from the main group. "Thanks for the rescue," she sighed when they were at a safe distance. "Years of practice evading family ambushes," he replied with a half-smile he rarely showed in public. "This path leads to the oldest part of the vineyard. We can take a breather here." The path narrowed, forcing them to walk closer. The sweet scent of ripe grapes filled the air, mingling with the perfume of sun-warmed earth. For the first time since the charade began, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. "It's beautiful," she murmured, watching how the vine leaves filtered the sunlight, creating dancing patterns on the ground. Damien watched her from the corner of his eye. The simple cotton dress she wore, and the wide-brimmed hat his cousin had lent her, made her seem like a part of the landscape, as if she had always belonged here. "My grandfather planted these vines," he commented, surprising himself by sharing the memory. "He used to bring me here when I was a kid. He said that to understand the family business, you first had to understand the land." Maya smiled. "He sounds like a wise man." He was. Damien stopped beside a particularly gnarled vine. "He died when I was 15. After that, everything changed." Something in his tone made Maya look at him more closely. For a moment, the cold, calculating man gave way to someone more vulnerable, almost wistful. "Is that why you're so—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Structured?" Damien looked at her in surprise. "Structured? That's a polite euphemism for obsessive control freak." "I just call it like I see it," she replied simply. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, each lost in their thoughts. As the path curved toward a natural overlook, Maya felt an inexplicable urge for honesty. "I lost my mother 2 years ago," she said suddenly. "Cancer. Since then, I've had to take care of my 2 younger siblings." Damien looked at her, taken aback by the unexpected confession. "You didn't have to tell me that." "I know. But since we're pretending, we might as well include a few truths, don't you think?" Her honesty completely disarmed him. Without the armor of formality he usually wore, Damien found himself asking, "How old are your siblings?" "Sophia is 17. She's finishing high school. She wants to study medicine, but—" She left the sentence hanging. "And Daniel is 12. He's a genius with math." "Do they live with you?" Maya nodded. "In a small apartment in Queens. I've been working since I was 15 when my mum first got sick. First cleaning, then waitressing, and now—" She paused, remembering the role they were playing. "And now you work for an idiot who forced you to pretend to be his girlfriend," he completed, with unexpected bitterness. She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't call you an idiot. You didn't have to." They continued walking, the silence between them now charged with something new and indefinable. The path became uneven, with old roots crossing the way. Absorbed in their conversation, Maya didn't see a prominent root. Her foot caught, and she lost her balance. Before she could fall, Damien's hands shot out, and gripped her firmly by the waist. Time seemed to stop. Their faces were inches apart, so close they could feel each other's breath. Maya's eyes, a warm amber that caught the afternoon light, met Damien's, usually cold but now burning with something indecipherable. His hands remained on her waist a second longer than necessary, a second that seemed to contain entire universes. "Thank you," she whispered, not looking away. Damien gave a slight nod, unable to form words. Something fundamental was shifting inside him, like tectonic plates moving silently beneath the surface. The sound of laughter and approaching voices broke the spell. Damien reluctantly let go of Maya, just as the main group appeared around a bend in the path. "There are the lovebirds," Evan exclaimed mischievously, sneaking off for a romantic moment. Maya blushed intensely, while Damien slipped his mask of indifference back on. "I was showing Maya the original vines," he replied in a neutral tone. Eleanor observed them with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "How thoughtful, grandson, although it seems to me you were showing her more than just vines." The family's laughter echoed through the vineyard, but neither Maya nor Damien joined in. They both knew that what had happened in that brief moment was not part of any rehearsed performance, and that, precisely, was the most terrifying part. The sun began its descent behind the distant silhouette of the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and red that reflected in the crystal wine glasses. The Blackwood family had gathered on the main terrace to enjoy their evening ritual, a toast with wine from the estate's special harvest, reserved exclusively for family celebrations. Maya watched, fascinated, as the twilight transformed each person's face, softening wrinkles and accentuating smiles. Even Damien looked different in that golden glow, less severe, almost approachable. Since the incident in the vineyard that afternoon, they had barely spoken, as if both were afraid to name what had happened between them. "To the Blackwoods!" exclaimed Uncle Arthur, the patriarch of one of the family branches, raising his glass. "Hand to the new additions that keep the blood of this old dynasty fresh." Everyone raised their glasses, directing knowing glances toward Maya, who smiled shyly. Beside her, Damien placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that had become frequent throughout the day, as if he subconsciously needed to maintain that physical contact. "Speaking of new additions," interjected Uncle Richard, known for his sharp tongue and relentless humor, "it strikes me as odd that for such a passionate family, we haven't seen a single display of affection between these two lovebirds. Could it be that my nephew is as cold in love as he is in business?" An awkward silence fell over the terrace, followed by nervous laughter. Maya felt a flush creep up her neck to her cheeks as Damien visibly tensed beside her. "Some people," he replied in a controlled voice, "prefer to keep their affections private, Uncle." "Nonsense," Eleanor exclaimed, unexpectedly joining the provocation. "In my day, a man in love wasn't afraid to show his feelings. Your grandfather used to steal kisses from me in front of the whole family without a care for the gossip." Expectant gazes fell upon the couple. Maya could feel Damien's discomfort, the slight tremor in the hand still resting on her back. Part of her wanted to rescue him, but another part, one she barely recognized, waited with bated breath for what might happen. "Kiss, kiss, kiss," Evan began to chant, and soon other cousins joined in the playful chorus. Damien looked at Maya with a mixture of apology and determination. He leaned in slightly and murmured, "We don't have to do this," but they both knew they did. Refusing would only heighten suspicion. Maya gave an almost imperceptible nod, giving him her permission. With deliberate slowness, as if offering her time to back out, Damien brought his face close to hers. His eyes, usually unreadable, now conveyed a storm of contained emotions. One of his hands came up to gently cup her cheek, an unexpectedly tender gesture that caught her by surprise. The first contact was tentative, almost cautious. Their lips barely brushed, like tasting unknown waters. But something shifted in that brief instant. What began as a calculated performance transformed into something electric, alive, uncontrollable. Damien deepened the kiss with an intensity that completely contradicted his icy facade. His hand slid to the nape of Maya's neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. She, surprised by the wave of sensations, instinctively clung to his shirt, completely forgetting her audience. The outside world dissolved. There were no meddling uncles, no manipulative grandmother, no unwritten contract that bound them. There was only this moment, suspended in time, where two people pretending to be in love discovered something dangerously close to the real thing. When they finally broke apart, both seemed equally stunned. Maya's eyes, dilated and shining, reflected the same confusion Damien was trying to conceal. "Well, I'll be," exclaimed Uncle Richard, breaking the spell. "I take it back." The boy inherited his grandfather's passion after all. Laughter and playful comments filled the terrace, but neither Damien nor Maya truly heard them. He pulled away abruptly, muttering something that sounded like, "Excuse me," before heading towards the house with brisk steps. Maya remained motionless, trying to compose herself as the conversations continued around her. Eleanor watched her with an enigmatic smile, like someone who had just confirmed a long-held suspicion. "The wine from this vintage has always been treacherous," the old woman commented, moving closer to Maya. "It releases truths we didn't even know we were keeping." Hours later, after dinner had ended and the family was retiring to their rooms, Maya entered the bedroom she shared with Damien. He wasn't there, the shower wasn't running, the private terrace was empty. He probably needed space, just as she did. Maya walked to the vanity mirror and studied her reflection as if expecting to find some visible change. Her lips felt more sensitive, and something in her eyes had subtly shifted. She felt like an imposter, but she no longer knew which part of her was the act. The efficient housekeeper, or the woman who had responded with such fervor to a supposedly staged kiss. A sound at the door startled her. Damien entered, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment they both stood still, like two cautious animals assessing the terrain. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I got carried away by the pressure of the moment." Maya nodded, unable to form a coherent response. What could she say? That she had gotten carried away too? That she had felt things she had no business feeling for her employer? "We should get some sleep," he continued, mechanically moving toward the sofa that had become his makeshift bed. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Maya prepared for bed in silence, going through her nightly routine like an automaton. When they finally turned off the lights, the darkness seemed to amplify the tension floating between them. In her bed, Maya could hear Damien's restless breathing, proof that he couldn't find sleep either. She wondered what thoughts were keeping him awake, if they were anything like the ones tormenting her own mind. Across the room, lying on the uncomfortable sofa, Damien stared at the ceiling with wide-open eyes. The taste of Maya lingered on his lips like a ghost. He tried to rationalize what had happened. Social pressure, the romantic atmosphere, perhaps the wine. Any explanation was preferable to admitting the truth that was beginning to materialize within him. The line between performance and reality, once so clear and defined, was now dangerously blurred. And the most terrifying part was that neither of them seemed able or willing to draw it again. The Sunday dawn brought with it an apparent calm. Maya woke early to find the sofa where Damien slept already empty. The tension from the previous night remained in the air like a persistent perfume. She needed fresh air and space to sort out her thoughts. After dressing simply, she went down to the kitchen expecting to find Mrs. Gable, but the space was deserted. She made coffee and went out to the back garden, where hydrangeas and beach roses created an oasis of color in the soft morning light. She sat on a stone bench, enjoying the silence. How different this world was from her own. Here, time seemed to stretch lazily, without the constant urgency of survival that marked her days in Queens. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Evan, Damien's cousin, emerged from a side path with a smile that was trying to be charming. An early riser like a working woman. "I like that." Maya tensed immediately but kept her expression pleasant. "Good morning, Evan." "Escaping the ogre?" he asked, sitting beside her uninvited, far too close for her comfort. "I don't get how someone as full of life as you ended up with my robot of a cousin." "Damien has qualities that not everyone can appreciate," she replied diplomatically. Evan let out a dismissive laugh. "Like what? His ability to freeze a room with his presence, or maybe his bank accounts?" The comment ignited a spark of indignation in Maya. "That's unfair. There's much more to him than his money or his apparent coldness." "Wow, he's really got you convinced," Evan responded, leaning closer. His arm slid along the back of the bench, brushing against Maya's shoulders. "Or you're an exceptional actress." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Did he suspect something? "I don't know what you mean," she murmured, trying to create distance without being obvious. "I mean," he continued, leaning toward her, "that a woman like you deserves someone who makes you feel alive, not a corporate iceberg, someone who recognizes the fire inside you." His hand came to rest on hers with an inappropriate familiarity. She was about to pull it away when a voice as sharp as a razor cut through the moment. "Am I interrupting something?" Damien stood before them, his figure silhouetted against the morning sun. Though his voice was controlled, Maya could detect a contained fury in his eyes, now dark as an impending storm. Evan removed his hand with studied slowness but didn't stand up. "Cousin, we were just talking about you." "I imagine so," Damien replied, his gaze fixed on Evan's hand that had just left Maya's. "I'm sorry to inform you that my girlfriend and I have plans this morning." The emphasis on "my girlfriend" was so sharp that Maya felt a surge of irritation. Since when was she a possession to be claimed? "I don't want to interrupt your family plans," she said, standing up. "I just came out for some air." "And I was simply offering pleasant company," Evan added with a defiant smile. After all, a prize left unguarded is fair game. Something in Damien's face shifted. The mask of civility cracked, revealing a raw, powerful emotion. "Maya is not an object to be lost or won," he pronounced in a glacial tone. "And if I see you near her with your obvious intentions again, I'll forget we share a last name." Evan stood up, confronting him. "Is that a threat, cousin?" "It's a promise," Damien answered. The air between the two men crackled with electricity. Maya intervened, placing herself between them. "Stop it! I'm not some trophy you can compete for," she exclaimed, her voice louder than she intended. A few family members eating breakfast on the terrace turned with curiosity. "Damien, I need to talk to you in private." Without waiting for a reply, she walked away toward a more secluded part of the garden. Damien followed after casting one last warning glare at his cousin. "What was that?" Maya snapped when they were alone among the rose bushes. "Am I your property now?" "I was defending you," he replied, the tension visible in every muscle of his jaw. "No, you were marking your territory like an alpha dog," she retorted. "I don't need you to defend me. I know how to handle guys like your cousin." "How?" "By responding to his advances." The accusation hit Maya like a slap. "You think I was flirting with him? You weren't exactly pushing him away." "Because I'm trying to maintain this ridiculous charade," she burst out, forgetting to lower her voice. "Do you want me to create suspicion by openly rejecting your family? Or is that jealousy I'm seeing, Damien?" The word jealousy dropped between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples of disturbance. Damien took a step back as if he'd been physically struck. "You're confusing things," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." "A business arrangement?" Maya repeated, hurt more deeply than she wanted to admit. "Was that last night's kiss? A contractual clause?" Several yards away, a few guests watched the scene with poorly concealed interest. Damien's expression shuttered completely, the vulnerability of seconds ago replaced by an impenetrable mask. "You're right, I overstepped," he conceded coldly. "It won't happen again." He turned on his heel and walked away with rapid strides toward the main house, leaving Maya alone in the middle of the garden, aware of the curious stares and rising murmurs. Damien stormed into the room, closing the door with more force than necessary. He went into the bathroom and confronted his reflection in the mirror. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him, undone, agitated, with a vulnerability so blatant it was painful. What was happening to him? In 3 days, this woman had dismantled defenses he had spent years building. Worse, she had provoked emotions he thought were buried under layers of pragmatism and control. "Jealousy," he murmured, tasting the word like a forgotten flavor. It was ridiculous. He didn't feel jealousy or attachment or anything that couldn't be catalogued on a spreadsheet. And yet, the image of Evan touching Maya's hand filled him with an irrational fury. The memory of her lips tormented him with an intensity that no contract could explain. For the first time in his adult life, Damien Blackwood was losing control. And what terrified him most was that a part of him, a part he didn't know existed, was enjoying the fall. Meanwhile, in the garden, Maya took refuge in a secluded corner. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back with determination. She felt humiliated, confused, and worst of all, wounded by words that shouldn't matter. This had to end. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for a man who saw her as a convenient employee, a pawn in his family game. She had to remember why she accepted this deal, for the money, for her siblings, for their future. So why did it feel like she was losing something far more valuable than her dignity in this game of appearances? Sunday passed in a silent tension. Damien immersed himself in family business meetings, while Maya found refuge helping Mrs. Gable prepare the Sunday lunch. Neither sought the other out, as if a tacit agreement of distance had been established between them. The family meal was an award-worthy acting exercise, polite smiles, superficial conversations, and calculated touches to keep the illusion intact. Eleanor watched the interactions between her grandson and his supposed girlfriend with narrowed eyes, but refrained from comment. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky orange and purple, most of the family members retired to rest before the trip back to the city, scheduled for the next morning. The estate settled into the quiet of dusk. Maya, emotionally exhausted, sought solitude on the side veranda of the house, an open space with stone columns and wooden rocking chairs that offered a privileged view of the distant coastline. She sat in silence, letting the cool evening breeze carry away some of her confusion. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a figure stopped beside her. Damien stood there, stripped of the formal suit he had worn during the day, wearing jeans and a cotton shirt that softened his usual appearance. "Can I sit?" he asked, his voice lacking the harshness that had wounded her that morning. Maya nodded slightly without looking at him. Damien took a seat in the adjacent rocker, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence stretched between them, but strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. "I came to apologize," Damien said finally, looking toward the horizon instead of at her. "My behavior this morning was inexcusable." Maya turned to him, surprised not so much by the words but by the genuinely remorseful tone. In the few months she had worked for him, she had never heard him apologize. "I acted like the controlling idiot everyone thinks I am," he continued, now meeting her gaze. "I had no right to speak to you that way, nor to intervene like that with Evan." "No," she agreed calmly, "you didn't." Damien gave a faint smile at her honesty. "I deserve that and more." "Why did you do it?" Maya asked, turning completely towards him. "And please don't tell me it was to keep the charade believable." The businessman took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage for something he rarely did. Be honest about his emotions. "I don't know," he admitted. "When I saw Evan's hand on yours, something reacted inside me. It was instinctive, almost primal." He paused, searching for the right words. "I've spent so much time building walls that I've forgotten how to handle what I feel when something manages to get through them." The confession floated between them like a fragile, precious bubble. Maya didn't dare break it immediately. "My entire adult life has been about controlling every variable," he continued, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Business, relationships, everything. Control means safety." "Safety from what?" she asked. Damien fixed his gaze on the distant ocean, as if seeing something beyond the horizon. "From abandonment," he answered finally. "My father left us when I was 8 years old. One day he was there, the next he was gone with his secretary and half the family's assets." Maya held her breath. She never would have imagined that such a deep wound lurked beneath the surface of the ruthless tycoon. "My mother fell into a depression that consumed her for years," he went on. "My grandfather was the one who taught me that emotions are dangerous in business, that sentimentality destroys empires. Never let anyone see your vulnerability, Damien. It's like showing your throat to a wolf." "Your grandfather taught you how to survive," Maya observed. "But surviving isn't the same as living." Damien looked at her with a mixture of surprise and recognition, as if she had articulated something he had always known but had never been able to name. "You know the irony?" He smiled faintly. "He was different in private. With my grandmother he was warm, even playful. They would hold hands when they thought no one was looking. But I used to spy on them sometimes, fascinated by that version of my grandfather the world never knew." The night had fallen completely as they spoke. The stars were beginning to appear in the dark canopy above them, and someone had switched on the gallery's dim lights without them noticing. "What about you?" Damien asked after a moment. "How did you end up raising your siblings so young?" Maya then told him about her mother, a brave woman who had fought cancer for years while keeping her small family together. She spoke of the sacrifices, of giving up her dreams of studying design, of the 3 simultaneous jobs she had to take after her mother passed away. "But I don't regret it," she concluded. "My sister is going to college next year. She'll be the first in our family." "You're extraordinary," Damien murmured, and for the first time since they had met, he smiled without reservation, a smile that completely transformed his face, illuminating his eyes with a warmth Maya had never seen in him. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. A simple touch, yet it was charged with a meaning that went far beyond words. It wasn't a romantic or passionate gesture. It was something deeper: recognition, understanding, perhaps even the birth of a true trust. They remained that way in a companionable silence as the night unfurled its starry blanket over the estate. They didn't need any more words. For the first time since their arrangement began, they weren't acting. They weren't the millionaire and his employee, not the fake couple playing a part. They were simply Damien and Maya, two people beginning to truly see each other. "It's late," she murmured eventually, though neither made a move to leave. "Yes," he replied, turning his hand to intertwine his fingers with hers. "We should rest. Tomorrow we go back to reality." The word reality landed between them like a stone, reminding them that this moment, this connection, existed in a parenthesis outside of real time. Tomorrow they would return to the city, to their separate lives, to the hierarchy that defined them. But as they walked back to their room together, they both knew, without needing to admit it, that something fundamental had shifted. The line between performance and truth hadn't just blurred, it had started to disappear completely. Monday morning arrived with a different kind of clarity. The atmosphere between Damien and Maya had subtly changed after their late-night conversation. During breakfast, they exchanged knowing glances that did not go unnoticed by Eleanor Blackwood, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. As the family prepared to say their goodbyes, the matriarch observed the couple with growing suspicion. She no longer saw the calculated performance of the first day, but something potentially more dangerous: authenticity. "Damien," the old woman called as the others dispersed to collect their belongings. "Join me in the study for a moment." The tone did not allow for refusal. Maya gave him a questioning look, but Damien simply nodded, briefly squeezing her hand before following his grandmother. The study at Grey Gables was a sanctuary of tradition. Walls lined with dark wood, an impressive collection of rare bourbons in glass cabinets, and sepia-toned photographs documenting generations of Blackwoods. Eleanor took a seat behind the desk that had belonged to her husband, gesturing for Damien to sit opposite her. "You have always been my favorite grandson," she began, without preamble. "The most like your grandfather, intelligent, calculating, ruthless in business." "Thank you, grandmother," he replied, tensing imperceptibly. "But unlike him, you never learned to lie convincingly." The old woman looked him directly in the eye. "Who is Maya Reed, really, and why did you bring her to this family gathering?" The silence that followed was as thick as the morning fog that sometimes rolled in from the Atlantic. Damien weighed his options: maintain the charade or confess everything. For the first time in his adult life, the lie tasted bitter in his mouth. "Maya works for me," he admitted finally, holding his grandmother's gaze. "She's my housekeeper. I hired her 3 months ago." Eleanor showed no surprise, only a profound disappointment that was far worse. "You paid your employee to pretend to be your partner." Her voice was soft but sharp. "How far have you fallen, Damien?" "It wasn't exactly like that," he defended himself. "I needed to end the family pressure about my personal life. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Beneficial?" the old woman repeated with disdain. "Did you put a price on that girl's dignity? On your family's trust?" The words hit Damien with unexpected force. Seen through his grandmother's eyes, his plan sounded despicable. "I didn't think—" "No, you didn't think," she cut him off. "Or you thought only like an executive, not like a man, and certainly not like a Blackwood." She rose with difficulty, leaning on her cane, suddenly looking much older than she was. "What disappoints me most," she continued, "is that last night I saw you two on the veranda. I saw how you looked at each other, how you held hands. That connection seemed real, and I was happy, thinking you had finally found someone to melt that ice you carry for a heart." Damien looked down, unable to meet his grandmother's scrutiny. The truth was, that connection had been real, the most authentic he had experienced in years. "What happened last night?" "That wasn't planned," he confessed in a low voice. "That makes it worse, Damien." Eleanor turned to the window, gazing out at the estate grounds. "That young woman doesn't deserve this. There is something special about her. I noticed it the moment she walked through the door. An honest and brave soul." She turned back to him, her severity renewed. "You must end this now. Let her go with the dignity she deserves, before this causes any more damage." "Grandmother, there is no discussion," she decreed. "If you have even a shred of your grandfather's honor, you will do the right thing. Otherwise, I will seriously reconsider your position as the primary heir to the Blackwood Group." The threat hung in the air as the matriarch exited the study, leaving Damien alone with the weight of his decisions and an ache in his chest he hadn't anticipated. Maya was finishing her packing when Damien entered the room. A single look at his face told her something was wrong. "Your grandmother knows, doesn't she?" she asked directly. He nodded, closing the door behind him. "She's always been too perceptive." He approached slowly, as if each step cost him enormous effort. Maya had never seen him like this, vulnerable, almost defeated. "We have to end this," he said finally. "Now." Although Maya had expected it, the words pierced her heart like splinters. "I understand," she replied with dignity. "The show is over." "It's not just that," Damien continued, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "My grandmother is insisting that I let you go from your job." Maya stood motionless, processing the full impact of his words. She wouldn't just lose this strange connection they had formed, she would also lose her job, the very livelihood that kept her family afloat. "I see," she murmured, turning away so he wouldn't see the shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I suppose a housekeeper who knows too many family secrets becomes an inconvenience." "It's not that." Damien stood up, moving toward her. "She believes that this, whatever is happening between us, can't exist with the employer-employee dynamic. And she's right." "And what is happening between us, Damien?" Maya asked, finally facing him, letting him see the vulnerability in her gaze. Was it all just part of the performance? The question hung between them like a fragile piece of glass that neither dared to touch. "I don't know," he admitted with painful honesty, "and that's precisely the problem. I can't offer you anything clear, anything definite. My life, my world, it's complicated." "I understand," she said, and she truly did. Two different worlds, two incompatible realities. "You don't need to explain." She finished closing her suitcase with hands that fought not to tremble. Damien watched her, paralyzed between what he had to do and what he wanted to do. "I'll compensate you financially," he said finally, retreating to his safe ground. "Business, transactions, 3 months' salary plus the promised bonus, and of course excellent references for your next job." Maya smiled sadly. To the very end, he was still trying to solve with money what money couldn't fix. "Thank you," she replied simply. When they went down to the foyer, the driver was already waiting to take her back to the city. The family was scattered, preparing for their own departures, but Eleanor appeared from the main living room. "Miss Reed," she called out with dignity, "it was a pleasure to have met you." Her eyes communicated much more, understanding, perhaps even a silent regret for the circumstances. Maya nodded respectfully. "The pleasure was all mine, Mrs. Blackwood. You have a beautiful family and a spectacular home." The farewell with Damien was brief and painfully formal. A handshake, a nod of the head, empty words that concealed everything they really wanted to say. As the car pulled away down the long, tree-lined drive, Maya finally allowed the tears to roll down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for the lost job, or even for the money she so desperately needed. She was crying for something that had just begun to bloom, and that now, cut off at the root, would never know how tall it might have grown. New York City greeted Damien with its usual chaos and noise, a brutal contrast to the serenity of the estate. But not even the constant roar of the metropolis could drown out the silence that now resided within him. Returning to his routine proved more difficult than he had anticipated. The board meetings, the urgent emails, the million-dollar decisions that once made him feel powerful now seemed like empty exercises. He caught himself looking toward his office door, half expecting Maya to walk in with a cup of coffee, and that contained smile he now understood was more valuable than any corporate acquisition. His penthouse in the Blackwood Tower, the perfectly designed space he had always considered a symbol of his success, now felt sterile and soulless. He walked through the immaculate rooms, feeling Maya's absence in every corner. The silence was deafening, as if the apartment itself missed her presence. The nights were the worst. He would lie awake, remembering fragments of their conversation on the veranda, the warmth of her hand in his, the brutal honesty with which she had challenged his certainties. None of the sophisticated women he had dated before had ever made him feel so seen, so understood, so vulnerable. A week passed, then 2. Damien grew irritable at work, impatient with his executives, absent in family meetings. His cousin Evan had tried to mock him about the mysterious disappearance of his girlfriend, but Damien's glacial stare was enough to silence him. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his study, he found the check he had prepared for Maya as compensation for the weekend. He had never managed to give it to her in the confusion of the hasty departure. He held it between his fingers, thinking how that piece of paper perfectly represented his way of relating to the world. Everything had a price. Everything could be translated into figures, but not Maya. What had emerged between them, that unforeseen connection, could not be quantified or negotiated. That night, as rain lashed against the panoramic windows of his apartment, Damien opened the drawer of his bedside table. Inside, in a small blue velvet box, rested the ring they had used during the charade. It was an old family heirloom, not overly ostentatious, but with an incalculable sentimental value. His grandmother had given it to him on the first day at the estate, believing he was finally getting serious. "When you're sure," she had told him, "give her your great-grandmother's ring. The Blackwoods don't propose unless we are absolutely certain." The irony was brutal. He had used the family ring in a lie, and now, contemplating it under the dim light of his lamp, he realized he had never been more certain of anything in his entire life. The next morning, he awoke with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. He cancelled all his meetings, something he had never done before, and drove his car through the persistent drizzle to Queens. Finding the exact address wasn't easy. The narrow streets and complicated traffic delayed him, but he finally pulled up in front of a modest 3-story brick building. According to the information he'd gotten from HR, Maya lived on the second floor with her siblings. The rain was coming down harder now, but Damien didn't move toward the entrance. He stood beside his car, letting the water soak him completely as he stared up at the second-floor windows. By what right did he have to just appear in her life like this, after firing and humiliating her? He was about to leave when the front door of the building opened. Maya was coming out with a colorful umbrella, dressed simply for a trip to the market. She stopped dead when she recognized him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She, protected under her umbrella. He, soaked by the relentless rain. "What are you doing here?" Maya finally asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the downpour. Damien took a step toward her, then another. Water streamed down his face, mixing with what could very well have been tears. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about everything." Maya watched him cautiously, but she didn't step back as he drew closer. "My life worked perfectly before I met you," he continued. "Everything was controlled, measured, predictable. And then you showed up with your brutal honesty and your ability to see through all my defenses." "Damien—" "No, let me finish," he interrupted softly. "These past days without you have been the emptiest I have ever experienced. I realized I've spent my entire adult life surviving, not living. You told me that night on the veranda, remember?" He pulled the small, soaked velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing the family ring. "My grandmother was right about one thing. We shouldn't propose anything unless we're completely sure." He held the box out to her. "I'm not asking you to marry me. That would be absurd after everything that's happened. What I'm asking for is a chance." Maya looked from the ring to Damien's face, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. "A chance for what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Damien smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face despite the rain falling on them. "To pretend a little longer," he answered in a whisper that held both vulnerability and hope. "But this time just for me. Pretend that we can start over, that I can be better than I've been, that what started as a lie can become the most important truth of our lives." Maya's umbrella tilted slightly, allowing a few drops of rain to land on her face, mingling with nascent tears. "And my siblings? My life here? They will be part of our story, if you want them to be. I'm not asking you to abandon who you are or where you come from. I'm asking you to let me be a part of it." A woman walked past them, giving them a curious glance. An argument in the rain, a soaked man, and a woman with an umbrella on the verge of yielding. It was a scene straight out of one of the soap operas her mother used to watch every afternoon. "It won't be easy," Maya warned. "We come from very different worlds." "I know," he nodded. "And I don't pretend everything will be magically resolved. I'm just asking for the chance to try, to discover together if what we felt at the estate can flourish in real life." Maya took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Delicately, she took the box from his hands, closed it and handed it back to him. "Keep this," she said in a soft voice. "When we're both sure, then we can talk about rings." And then, with a gesture that held all the answer Damien needed, Maya raised her umbrella to shield them both from the persistent rain, creating a small universe where only the two of them existed, in the middle of a Queen's Street, beginning something neither had planned but that both now wanted more than anything in the world. Maya lifted the umbrella a little higher, shielding Damien more completely, as the rain continued to fall around them, creating a curtain of water that isolated them from the world. Their eyes met in that small, shared universe, and without needing words, she leaned towards him. This kiss had nothing to do with the one at the estate. There was no family watching, no calculated performance. It was just Maya and Damien, vulnerable and honest for the first time since they had met. A kiss that tasted of rain, of promises and of second chances. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling with a mixture of wonder and certainty. "Do you want to come up?" she asked. "My siblings are at school. We can talk in peace." Maya's apartment was exactly as Damien had imagined it, small but immaculate, decorated with plants and family photographs, with books stacked on every available surface. It was a world away from his own minimalist, cold penthouse. "It's cozy," he commented sincerely, as she made coffee in the small kitchen. "It's our home," Maya replied simply. "It's not much, but—" "It's perfect," he interrupted. Seated at the kitchen table with steaming mugs between them, they began to trace the outlines of what could be. It wouldn't be easy. There were entire worlds to reconcile, prejudices to face, past wounds to heal. "My grandmother will adore you when she really gets to know you," Damien said, taking her hand across the table. Maya laughed softly. "Your grandmother already knows me, and she had me fired. You'd be surprised. She values authenticity above all else, and what she saw at the estate, despite the circumstances, was genuine." Damien's predictions proved true, though the path was not simple. Eleanor, initially reticent, surrendered to the evident transformation in her grandson. The Damien who now visited the family home every week was almost unrecognizable. He smiled more, listened attentively, and had even begun to participate in the charitable foundations his grandmother had always wanted him to support. Maya's siblings, Sophia and Daniel, welcomed Damien with a mix of caution and curiosity. The millionaire tycoon turned out to be surprisingly good at playing video games with Daniel and helping Sophia with her college applications. Little by little, the barriers came down. 6 months after that encounter in the rain, while celebrating Sophia's acceptance into medical school, Damien announced that he had created a university scholarship foundation in honor of Maya's mother. It was the first time the Reed siblings hugged him spontaneously. Spring brought with it cherry blossoms that painted the city in shades of pink, and an inevitable invitation, the annual Blackwood family gathering at the estate in the Hamptons. This time there would be no lies. "Are you nervous?" Maya asked as the car traveled the same road they had traversed months earlier, as actors in a charade. Damien took her hand and kissed it gently. "For the first time in my life, I'm completely at ease." Grey Gables looked more beautiful than ever, with the vineyards shining under the May sun and the gardens exploding in color. As they walked through the main doors, Maya squeezed Damien's hand, remembering her first visit. The family greeted them with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. For many, it was incomprehensible that the relationship they had witnessed months ago was a sham, and even more incomprehensible that it was now real. "So, you lied to all of us?" Uncle Richard asked during dinner, unable to contain his confusion. "Let's just say we started the story at the end," Damien replied with a smile. "We had to pretend to be in love to realize that we actually could be." Evan, seated across from them, raised his glass with a surprisingly sincere gesture. "To the unexpected paths that lead us where we're meant to be." That night, Maya and Damien walked to the veranda where they had shared their first honest conversation. The moon illuminated the vineyards with a silver light, creating an almost magical landscape. "There's something I've wanted to show you," Damien said, guiding her to a secluded corner of the garden. Beneath an ancient oak tree, he had commissioned a small stone plaque. Engraved on it were the names of his mother, Catherine, Maya's mother, Eleanor, and his grandfather. "So they will always be present in this place that changed our lives." Maya, moved to tears, hugged him tightly. "I love you, Damien Blackwood, with all your complications and your heart that is no longer made of ice." Later, when the night was late and most of the family had retired, Eleanor found them sitting by the central fountain. She approached with a slow but determined step. "My intuition rarely fails me," the old woman said, sitting beside them. When I saw you two together the first time, something told me there was truth hidden beneath the lie. I'm sorry for the deception, grandmother, Damien began, but she cut him off with a gesture. Don't apologize for something that brought us here. She turned to Maya and took her hands. I have never seen my grandson so happy, so's alive. That is priceless. Before leaving, the matriarch pulled the small blue velvet box from her pocket, which Damien recognized immediately. I believe this belongs to you, she said, handing it to him. Use it when you are both ready. There's no rush. True love knows how to wait for its moment. A year after that first weekend, Maya found herself once again on the veranda of the estate watching the sunset. This time, she was dressed in white and wore garden roses in her hair. Damien came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He whispered against her ear. About how life comes full circle, she replied, leaning back against his chest. I came here as your employee, pretending to be your girlfriend, and now you're my wife, he completed, turning her to face him. The best decision I have ever made. In the garden, family and friends waited for the celebration. Sophia, now a medical student, chatted animatedly with the Blackwood cousins. Daniel was showing his latest robotics project to some of Damien's investor friends. Two worlds had merged in unexpected ways. Do you know what's most ironic? Maya said, caressing her new husband's face. We had to pretend in order to be honest. We had to pretend to love each other to give ourselves permission to actually do it. Damien smiled, that full smile he once reserved only for private moments, which now constantly graced his face. So, was the whole lie worth it? Every single second, she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. This kiss, unlike the first one they shared in this very spot, had no audience and no pressure. It wasn't a performance or a demonstration. It was simply the natural expression of what they had built together, a love that began as the most elaborate of fictions and had become the most beautiful of truths. The morning light filtered through the large windows of their Brooklyn Heights brownstone, illuminating the kitchen where Maya was preparing coffee, humming softly. At 32, her beauty had deepened, acquiring the confidence that comes only from knowing you are loved and respected. Is Ethan still asleep? Damien asked, walking into the kitchen with his hair still damp from his morning shower. At 40, the silver at his temples gave him a distinguished air that contrasted with the relaxed smile that was now a permanent feature of his face. Like a log, Maya replied, pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs they'd bought on their last anniversary. He stayed up late with your grandmother last night, learning how to play chess. I think Eleanor is determined to turn him into a grandmaster before he turns 4. Damien laughed, taking a sip of coffee. My grandmother claims that all the great Blackwood negotiators learned strategy by playing chess. It's a family tradition. Their son, Ethan, 3.5 years old, was the perfect combination of them both, Maya's amber eyes and Damien's determination, but with an infectious laugh that had melted even the hardest hearts in the Blackwood family. The life they had built together was very different from what anyone would have anticipated. After their wedding, they decided against moving into his penthouse or staying in her small Queens apartment. Instead, they bought a house in Brooklyn Heights, a neighborhood with soul and character, where the century-old trees and cobblestone streets created a perfect atmosphere to raise a family. Damien had undergone his own professional transformation. He still ran the Blackwood Group, but he had revolutionized the family business by incorporating social responsibility and sustainability practices that initially scandalized the more conservative members of the board. The Elena Reed Foundation, created in honor of Maya's mother, had already provided scholarships to over 200 students from underserved communities. Maya, for her part, had found her own path. Far from becoming the typical corporate wife dedicated to charities and social events, she had revived her deferred dream of studying design. She now ran a workshop that employed women from vulnerable communities to create home decor pieces that were sold in luxury boutiques, combining traditional American artisan techniques with contemporary design. What time are Sophia and Chris arriving? Damien asked, making toast while Maya cut up fruit. Afternoon. Sophia is on call at the hospital until 11. Sophia, now in her pediatric residency, had married Chris the previous year, an engineer she had met at a conference organized by the foundation. Daniel, Maya's younger brother, was studying robotics at MIT on a full scholarship he had earned on his own merits, though Damien always made sure he wanted for nothing. Do you have everything ready for the trip to Santa Fe? Damien continued, checking messages on his phone. Almost. The artisans in the pueblos are excited to show us their new weaving designs. I think this collaboration will be very important for the workshop. The trip combined business and pleasure. While Maya visited artisan communities for her project, Damien would explore the possibility of installing solar panels in rural schools through the foundation. Ethan, as always, would accompany them. They had decided since his birth that family trips were sacred, regardless of professional demands. A soft cry from the baby monitor interrupted their conversation. "I'll go," Damien said, putting down his coffee. "You finish your breakfast." Maya watched him walk away and smiled to herself. Who would have imagined that the cold, controlling man would become such a dedicated father? Fatherhood had completed the transformation that began that weekend in the Hamptons, revealing a tenderness and patience that no one, not even he himself, knew he possessed. Minutes later, Damien returned with a sleepy Ethan in his arms, his dark head resting on his father's shoulder. "Someone wants to say hi to Mommy," he announced, approaching Maya. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes lighting up when he saw his mother. "Mommy, are we going to see Grandma Eleanor today?" "Yes, my love. It's her birthday, remember? That's why Aunt Sophia and Uncle Chris are coming." The little boy nodded seriously. He adored his great-grandmother, who at 85 was still a force of nature, and had found in her great-grandson a worthy opponent for chess and strategy games. The relationship between Eleanor and Maya had also evolved into one of deep, mutual respect. The matriarch valued her granddaughter-in-law's strength and authenticity, while Maya appreciated the old woman's wisdom and determination. Together, they had established a microloan program for female entrepreneurs that was transforming entire communities. That day, as they celebrated Eleanor's birthday at the same estate where their story began, surrounded by family and friends from both their worlds, now perfectly intertwined, Damien took Maya's hand under the table. "Any regrets?" he whispered, a question they had asked each other on every anniversary of their first meeting. Maya looked around, at Ethan playing with his cousins, at Sophia and Chris talking animatedly with the Blackwood uncles, at Daniel showing his latest project to some investors, at Eleanor presiding over the table with the dignity of a queen. Finally, her eyes returned to Damien, the man who had gone from being her arrogant boss to her accomplice, lover, and best friend. "Not a single one," she replied with absolute certainty. Later, as the sun began to set over the vineyards, Maya and Damien slipped away to their favorite spot on the veranda, the same place where years ago they had shared their first truths, where the performance began to transform into reality. "You know what I was thinking," Damien said, hugging her from behind as they watched the sunset, "that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, but disguised as something we never would have looked for." Maya turned in his arms to look him in the eye. "Who knew the cold-hearted tycoon had a hidden poet inside him? Only you could find him," he replied, leaning in to kiss her. And so, under the same sky that had witnessed their initial charade, they shared a kiss that held all the truth they had built together, a love that defied social classes, prejudices, and expectations, transforming not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The lie that brought them together had become, with the passage of time and the power of honesty, the most beautiful and enduring truth of their lives.